Hi, and welcome to Best on Tesla. Do you hear from friends or people you meet that EVs are not so good for the environment and ICE is still the king? Well, you probably want to show them this video because the scientific proof is here, and not just one study but hundreds of studies are piling up from leading international universities and big neutral organizations like Europeans TNE, the European Federation for Transport and Environment. So no, this is not research with some hidden agenda sponsored by ExxonMobil. These are just the simple facts about EVs versus ICE cars. And JB Straubel has just shown us their research that take recycling into the equation, as TNE did in their research, and this changes the game completely. And this has really not been incorporated into many studies before, that is trying to show that we have not enough materials to make this work. And not only does all of this put a final nail in the coffin about EVs versus ICE cars talk, but this also shows us that Tesla actually has an even bigger advantage than someone like Ford and GM that most people think. This will show you that it will be impossible for GM and Ford to ever compete with Tesla on price, or should I say profitability, because they can of course sell at a loss as they do right now, but that is of course not sustainable long term. But they will never be able to do what Tesla is doing, as I will show you in this video. So if you ever meet people that want to discuss this, just show them this video and you can rest your case. So let's check it all out and let's dive right in. So, JB Straubel, one of Tesla's co-founder and now CEO of Red Materials, showed us that recycling will be a very big contributor to get the cost of EV batteries down even more in the future.
But it will absolutely, inevitably, I'm 100% sure of this, transition into a closed-loop economy.
As JB Straubel pointed out in his keynote, that 54% of the cost of a battery cell is its cathodes. So when we are talking about batteries becoming cheaper in the future, it is not just the economy of scale, that is of course a part of it, but the recycling of materials will dramatically drive down the cost of materials themselves that goes into the batteries, because when you cross the old battery pack, you will get the best ore in the world. And Redwood will then not just take that materials, but actually make the cathode and anodes themselves to get the cost down of the cathodes. Because no matter how many millions of battery cells you make, they will never become cheaper than the materials that goes into them. And cathode is about 54.3% of the cost, and anodes about 9.4% of the cost. So 63.7% of the cost of a battery cells that goes into our EVs comes from these two components alone. So getting this into a closed loop of recycling and directly making the cathode and anodes on site where you recycle the batteries will reduce the price significantly.
Recycling and localizing supply chain, creating circular supply chains, in my view, is going to be one of the biggest long-term cost reduction drivers.
And this also means in the future, automakers in the US will no longer have to buy materials from, let's say, Chile and then transport it all the way to China to make it into cathodes and anodes, and transport it all the way back to the US to make the batteries and put them into the cars. We will skip a lot of all that transportation around the world a couple of times by simply recycling it in the US, making it into cathodes right there, and just truck it into your Tesla battery facility and then make the batteries and then put it straight into the car and build that car at the same factory. This will reduce the cost of making batteries many times over and reduce the amount of energy that is needed to transport all of those materials several times around the world, and reduce the amount of new materials that is needed in the future. And both Redwood and Tesla will do this. So even though batteries have come down from over $1,000 per kilowatt hours to just over $100 in just 10 years, it will continue to drop in price for many decades to come. So yes, the EVs will become much cheaper than ICE cars when the most expensive component in the EV will drop significantly in price, and we truly get the economy of scale when others than just Tesla get to high volume of EVs, like over 1 million EVs produced every year. This will make sure the EVs will become a much cheaper choice than equivalent ICE cars, even on the sticker price in the not so distant future. Recycling is the key of EVs that many people still don't get and therefore don't take into calculations, and many researchers don't take it into their research. Even though T&E has made a huge study on this last year that showed us that EV consumes about 300 to 400 times less key resources than an ICE car does in its lifetime when we take recycling into the equation, because an EV battery that gets a lot of hate from all the EV haters can be used again and again and again, while the gasoline can only be used once. I did make a whole video about this back in March 2021. I will leave a link to that down below, and combine this knowledge with the research from Lund University and 14 additional leading international universities that shows that the world can run on 100% renewable energy system by or before 2050. The research suggests that the new energy system would be based largely on solar and wind energy, energy storage, sector coupling, and direct and indirect electrification of almost all energy demand. An energy system that is 100% based on renewable has emerged to become scientific mainstream now. Hundreds of scientific studies have proven that 100% renewable energy system can be achieved on a global, regional, and national level by 2050. The numbers of published studies that have proven this grow by 27% annually since the year 2010 and continue to grow each year. As Professor Christian Breyer from Lund University concluded, a quick increasing number of research conclude that the entire energy system demand can be met based on renewables, and that doing so will actually be cheaper long term while fulfilling sustainability requirements. So even though it is already cheaper to own an EV today than it is an ICE car, this will also become much cheaper in the future as well and become 100% sustainable. And we have seen research from Tony Seba's Rethink about this as well, saying the same thing, how we will have an abundance of energy in the future because of what they call superpower. As they point out, solar and wind are already the cheapest new energy option and cost less than existing coal, gas, and nuclear power plant in many areas. The cost of solar and wind and battery system will fall another 70% by 2030, making disruption inevitable. All according to Tony Seba. And before you start saying he's wrong and you know better than he does and his research team, just remember he did predict what would happen with solar, wind, and batteries and EVs all the way back in 2010. And he was laughed off the stage, and he was right on the money. So he has a very good track record on his research. I would not bet against. And as they show in their research, 100% solar, wind, and battery system naturally produce a huge surplus of clean energy at near zero material cost that they call superpower, where 20% investment could increase the superpower made by as much as 200 to 300%. So according to Rethink's research, this will make the disruption inevitable and not only make renewable 100% possible, but make sure we will have energy in an abundance. So in 30 years from now, we will have our entire energy system running on renewables, and that will mean our transportation will also be run on 100% renewables. And at the same time, that is probably also when we will really start to see a closed loop of making batteries from recycling all the old batteries we we have been making at high volume for the last 30 years at that point. That will make the EV use a minimal amount of raw materials for making a car, and the battery and the energy we will be running on at that point will be 100% renewable. So very little loss in material in every aspect of the car. So the amount of raw materials and resources an EV will consume will be probably even less than the 30 kilos worth of materials according to the TNE and their research that was based on today's grid in different countries. But ICE cars over its lifetime, an average medium ICE cars will still burn close to 17,000 liters of petrol. When putting into perspective the total amount of key resources that are consumed and which cannot be recovered with an ICE car, the EV uses somewhere between 300 to 400 times less resources, even with today's much dirtier grid than what we will have in 2015 when it's all 100% renewable. We can't even compare these two vehicles. This is absolutely no doubt that ICE cars not only pollute the air in our cities, so thousands of people die each year, but the consumption of resources from the earth is 300 to 400 times higher than an ICE car, according to TNE, and the EV will eventually come down to almost nothing when we have a closed loop with recycling. But if something is lost, we still have to mine, right? Not really, because we also have to understand that just how much better the battery technology will be in 2050 when they recycle some batteries that are maybe 20 to 30 years old, because we might lose about 5% of the materials when we recycle, but the battery's energy density in 30 years is going to be much better than it is today. Just try to look back 30 years and see how bad the batteries were 30 years ago compared to today. So when they recycle some of the cars we put on the road today in 20 years time, they will probably be able to produce 2 new batteries on 1 old batteries. So we will constantly be in an excess of these materials, just like JB Straubel just said in his keynote on battery materials. They already now have an excess of cobalt that they recycle because the batteries we are making today compared to 20 years ago use a lot less cobalt. And that will only continue to go down. And the LFP batteries that are really getting momentum right now use 0 cobalt. So when Redwood Materials recycle 1 old lithium battery with a lot of cobalt in them, they end up with much more cobalt than what is needed for a new, much better and cheaper battery than before. And LFP batteries are used probably much more than what people think. Like 56% of all Tesla's cars sold in 2021 had LFP batteries, so they didn't use any cobalt whatsoever. And Tesla gets LFP batteries from both CATL, but will now also get it from BYD with their Blade battery technology. And once again, I would just like to make sure everyone knows this, because every time I mention it, I always get some comments back that I didn't know about cobalt and the oil industry. So I will keep mentioning it until everyone knows it, because the oil industry, just in the US, they use about 216 million pounds of cobalt every year. That is just what is lost every year. Why, you might ask? Well, because it takes about 1 pound of cobalt to remove the sulfur of 80,000 gallons of petrol products, like gasoline. Because we don't want the sulfur, because that was what made the acid rain back in the days. But 98.8% of the cobalt is recovered, meaning we permanently lose a pound of cobalt for every 6.6 million gallons of oil we refine. But we use a lot of gasoline, and therefore a lot of cobalt is lost. And in the US alone, in 2019, about 142 billion gallons of gasoline were used. So about 216 million pounds of cobalt was lost to remove the sulfur from the crude oil. And they will continue to use cobalt and continue to dig it up from the ground. It is not just the oil they dig up from the ground, also the cobalt they use and will continue to use forever. But we can see the EV industry is already switching over to LFP batteries or LMFP batteries that use no cobalt or nickel for that matter, and have a longer lifespan than the lithium batteries. And as I said, we see Tesla actually using more LFP batteries than lithium batteries. And we have seen Ford being out saying that they will also be using LFP batteries in the future, but it will probably take many years for them to be able to put it into their cars, as they need to make a lot of changes to the EVs and the software for it to be compatible. It is not as simple as just sticking a new battery into your car. I know Tesla make it look like that, as they use lithium batteries and LFP batteries and from 6 different suppliers, because Tesla is able to make changes on the fly and create a whole new production line with new batteries and just write new software to that by themselves, just as we saw with the semiconductors. Within 2 weeks, Tesla had new software so they could use 19 different chips instead of just one, and the other car manufacturers are still struggling with semiconductors because they still haven't made new software for new chips. That is just how slow they are moving. So yes, Ford is saying they will be using LFP batteries in the future, but it will probably take a few years for them to get all that set up. This again is just showing us what a big advantage Tesla has over everyone else. No one else can do this. Just look at GM. They have lost $2 billion on recall of their Bolt because of battery issues with their pouch cells that Elon warned about, that LG made for them, but it is still LG that is making all of GM's new batteries for their ultimate battery platform, because GM doesn't really have another option, because they can't use batteries from many other suppliers and change everything on the fly, and has not even said they have a plan for LFP batteries yet, so they are probably much further behind in that regard. We also have to remember that many of the legacy automakers can't really use LFP batteries until they have a more efficient EV, so they need those better performing but much more expensive nickel batteries in even their standard range cars to be able to just get close to Tesla's performance in range. As we also see with the Volkswagen standard range ID3, it still uses nickel batteries, even though it still has less range than a Tesla Model 3 standard range that use LFP batteries in a much bigger car. So Tesla is constantly changing, adapting to new battery technology, whereas the others, this will take years for them to do so, where Tesla will be able to use something new in a couple of months if they want to. And remember, Tesla is already recycling about 50 battery packs per week at their Nevada factory. So this is not some hocus pocus, this is already being done. So Tesla will do the same thing as Redwood Material, but Tesla will only be focusing on recycling their own batteries, of course, where Redwood Material recycle batteries from thousands of different products. Tesla is already building a cathode building at the Texas Gigafactory, where Tesla will make their own cathodes. So even though Ford has already signed a deal with Redwood, and that is a great move from Ford, Redwood of course need to be paid for the recycling and for the cathode and anodes they will be making. Tesla doesn't have to pay anyone. And then Ford will ship the material to its factory it has in a joint venture with SKI, where SKI will make the batteries from those materials, and again Ford has to pay SKI for making the batteries. Tesla don't have to pay anyone for their own batteries. So even though this might sound like Ford is doing kind of the same thing as Tesla, recycling with Redwood and making their own batteries with SKI, but it is very different what Tesla is doing, because Tesla has the expertise to do all of this themselves. Ford and GM don't. They are not battery manufacturer, but Tesla is. This simple fact alone shows us that Ford will probably never be able to keep up with Tesla even long term, because Tesla will make much cheaper batteries long term than what Ford will ever be able to do, because Ford have to pay 2 third parties, suppliers, and Tesla none. Tesla will in maybe 30 years start to really truly have a closed loop system on the factory like the Texas factory. Tesla will make their own cars faster and cheaper and more efficient than anyone else with its giga factories and giga castings and so on. Also because Tesla will be one of the only ones that truly get the economy of scale, because they make a few models in the millions, where someone like GM will spread it all thin over 30 different models, will never be as profitable as Tesla. Then Tesla will get the battery pack back that Tesla has already earned money on selling in the first car, recycle them at the Texas factory, making the cathode and anodes at the Texas factory, and then making the batteries themselves from those materials also at the Texas factory, putting them into the car, making the car once again in the Texas factory. No one else will be able to keep up with this. And Tesla just made a deal for nickel with the Indonesian mining company, as I mentioned in my news show, and a 5-year contract worth about $5 billion. That single contract, and Tesla has multiple nickel contracts with other companies, but that single contract will probably be enough nickel for all their growth through the next 5 years or so. Because this should be nickel enough for maybe 6 to 10 million Model 3s, for example, depending on how good the battery gets. And remember, 56% of all their cars last year were LFP batteries, which do not use any nickel. So this is a huge contract that Tesla has made, something no other legacy automakers are doing because they don't have the ambition to scale as fast as Tesla. But Tesla has already made sure they have enough materials for their growth. But this also means that Tesla will suck in a lot of supply of the raw material, which will mean even though the others want to catch up to Tesla's big ambitions of 20 million cars in 2030, they will probably not be able to get the materials because Tesla is making so big contracts that mining company probably don't have much more to sell to other car companies that are late to the party. So Tesla is really thinking this all the way through. As JB Straubel was saying, they have done so from the beginning of the production of the Model 3, but he doesn't really think the other OEMs understand all of this and have thought all of this all the way through from mining to end product. Also because they don't have the expertise in batteries and battery materials as Tesla does. And of course software. So in my opinion, the only incentive our governments need to make is to make opening a mine a much faster process, because this can take many years to do so. So I think the government need to help us with mining of materials and don't need incentive on electric cars themselves. They will become much cheaper very fast over the next couple of years. And as we see, the UK government has already stopped all incentive on EVs because they sell themselves, and they will now focus on the charging infrastructure. So that is good, but hopefully they will also see the need to help us all out with mining of the materials until we get to the closed loop system. So to recap all of this, if that's possible, it all just makes Tesla even more ahead than many people think. And others that do not do the same as Tesla will never be able to have the same kind of profits as Tesla does. But that is one thing, and all with the Tesla eyes. But 100% renewable energy system is scientifically proven by hundreds of researchers to be possible by 2050 and is inevitable, according to Tony Seba. That will only make the argument even better for the EV against anything else. Also, that the ICE car consume about 300 to 400 times as much key resources than an EV through its lifetime also just shows us that the argument for the ICE car is just stupid, or the EVs are not clean enough is just a joke, especially when we combine that knowledge with the recycling of batteries that JB Straubel did just talk about. That will make the consumption of materials in the future almost next to nothing, and it will all become a closed loop in the end. This is just the final nail in the coffin of the EV versus ICE talk. There is no comparison between these two vehicles, not even close. The ICE car is dead, and the EVs is here to stay and rule it all, since 100% of our energy will eventually become renewable, and the EV can be recycled forever. So no, hydrogen cars and truck won't even come close either. What do you think? Do you know research that can point in the other direction or confirm what we're talking about here? Please leave a comment down below, and don't forget a link to the research, and we can take a dive into that. And thank you for watching. And until next time, take care out there and be nice.